EMDR is really like magic therapy. I'd rather keep it real with ya. I've been in therapy. Let's see, I said in the bipolar disorder episode, I went to therapy when I was a child, then I stopped, and then around the time that I was 16, I ended up being hospitalized and going to therapy regularly, and then it stopped. And then when I was in college, I literally on day one had a mental breakdown, and I ended up starting to see a therapist every week. And so for several years while I was in college, I was seeing a therapist every single week, except for when it was nope, even when we had breaks. The only breaks where I wouldn't see them would be like a Christmas break. But when we had like summer vacation or whatever, I was still seeing that therapist on a regular. And then after I left college, I still was seeing a therapist regularly. So even with those years of therapy, it helped in a lot of ways, but it could not address those underlying compounded issues that I was having. When regular therapy doesn't work, you end up getting recommended to do something called EMDR. EMDR stands for, let me read, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So basically what EMDR is, it's a trauma therapy, and it is focused on rewiring your brain. So when you experience the traumas that you did and they were so compounded, it rewired your brain to be only in survival mode, which makes life very difficult once you're out of survival mode. Think about it kind of as, you know, a soldier coming back from war and then having trouble adjusting to regular life in America because they're just so used to being ready to kill someone, or, you know, hearing bombs, and really what they heard was fireworks, but they heard bombs and then they freaked out and, you know, hurt somebody because they thought they were back in that situation. It's the same way with people who have complex trauma, is that they may not have went to war, but they might as well have as a child, because they were in these super, you know, high stress, chaotic, and abusive situations that just scarred them and rewired their brain. And because it's your brain that's rewired, you can't just talk yourself out of it. You can't positive affirmation yourself out of this. You literally have to get this specialized type of trauma therapy. And so I'm just gonna read it, okay? Because it's a lot. It's a lot, and even I fully don't understand what it is. It's kind of like miracle therapy, you know. But basically, EMDR is a psychotherapy that enables people to heal from the symptoms and emotional distresses that are the results of disturbing life experiences. Repeated studies show that by using EMDR, people can experience the benefits of psychotherapy that once took years to make a difference. EMDR shows that the mind can in fact heal from psychological trauma much as the body recovers from physical trauma. When you cut your hand, as an example, when you cut your hand, your body works to close the wound. If a foreign object or repeated injury irritates the wound, it festers and causes pain, just like trauma. Once the block is removed, healing resumes. EMDR therapy demonstrates that a similar sequence of events occurs with the mental process. The brain's information processing system naturally moves towards mental health. If the system is blocked or imbalanced by the impact of a disturbing event, the emotional wound festers and can cause intense suffering. Once that block is removed, healing resumes. So what is the block necessarily? I think the block, and again, I'm not a trauma therapist. I'm just saying based off my personal experience. When you go through a trauma, it is like having something just stuck in you. That sounds wrong. That sounds real wrong. I'm sorry, but it's like think about each trauma you have as a needle being stuck into your brain. And a needle stuck in different parts of your brain, and it activates different parts of your brain. And over time, you just have so many fucking needles, you don't know what to do. And if you go to see a mental health professional that is trained in trauma therapy, remember that not every therapist can do trauma therapy. That is them pulling those needles out of your brain. And they can't pull them all out at once. They got to do one slowly, and then let your brain in your body heal from having that needle in there for so long. And then they go to the next one, and then they go to the next one, and then they go to the next one. And they just keep going until you've healed from all your traumas and those wounds are gone. So let's take it back to the car accident example. You get in a car accident, your body has the stress response of, oh shit, got in a car accident. Once you're no longer in the car accident and you're at home, your body's natural response is to say, you're not in danger anymore, you're okay, you at home, you can calm down now. And you calm down. If this was a traumatic experience, you don't calm down. If it's a traumatic experience, you go home, but your brain is still in that intersection with that other car pressed up against your car. And your brain won't leave that place. You can't will it away. You can't meditate it away. You can't positive affirmation it away. You can't distract yourself from it. That's not how trauma works. Trauma is going to stay there until you get a professional to move it out the way so that you can go back to your normal life. And so there are different methods people use with EMDR. You might have seen, if you look it up, you might see someone saying this, and then your eyes have to go like left to right and stuff. It's kind of weird. With my first car accident, I did something similar to that to kind of help me like process what happened. But I mean, and it worked. I mean, I was not stressing about that car accident like a few weeks later. But the type of trauma therapy that I'm going through right now, instead of doing this, they use something called tappers, which they aren't tappers. They are like little things that you put in your hand and they vibrate and they alternate. So one hand vibrates, then the other hand, and the other hand, and the other hand. And what that does is it stimulates the different sides of your brain. And then while it's doing that, the therapist walks you through the process of processing that trauma and doing it in a way that while they're stimulating those different sides of your brain, helps your brain actually learn how to like do the normal healing process that it would do in another situation, but it couldn't do in this situation. So it's actually very, very aggressive. Kind of like a last resort thing, like nothing else works, so let's do this. When you go through it, it's gonna be like the first several times you go through it, you're gonna be like really dazed and lightheaded because it's really gonna be helping you unlock like that trauma. And then literally it's like you get in that trauma and then you move around and you walk around in the trauma world and you just kind of like analyze the shit out of everything that's going on so that your brain can understand, okay, this is over now, we can move on. And the reason that I'm making this video so much earlier than I originally anticipated was because on Friday, I closed one of my traumas. And so I decided, and you can do different ways with your traumas. I have a trauma timeline. And some people do most recent trauma to the oldest trauma. Some people do the biggest trauma to the smallest trauma. I chose to go chronologically from the oldest trauma to the most recent trauma. The oldest trauma is a trauma that I don't remember. And it is a secondary trauma, meaning that it didn't happen to me. I witnessed it happen to someone else. And so navigating that trauma was kind of difficult for me because I didn't remember it. I only remember it being told about it, even though somewhere in my brain that memory was there. So it was still a trauma and it was still something that had to be addressed and worked on. And things that I noticed while I was going through that trauma therapy was difficulty breathing, you know, pain in different parts of my body. And after each session, I'd be very, very dazed. I'd have a brain fog, you know, and I'd be like, the only reason I got home was because my body remembered how to get home. So when Friday happened, we were going through the trauma and I noticed that talking about it over and over again was not triggering me the way that it used to. My body was just kind of like, yeah, that happened. Okay. And so and she told me she would let me know when I was done with her trauma. And obviously this wasn't the first time. I've been seeing her a couple months now just on this one trauma. And she literally told me, she was like, you can open your eyes now because you close your eyes while you're walking yourself through the trauma. You can open your eyes now. We're good. We're done. We've healed from that trauma. I was like, for real? You mean to tell me I could have did this shit like 10, 15, 20 years ago? Hell yeah, I could have did this shit 20 years ago. And I would have been done. And it would not have been something that affected me for the last 2 decades. I could have just did this in like a couple months and I'm good. Obviously some traumas may take longer than that, you know, to process, but and obviously it wasn't easy because you have to get in that trauma. You have to relive a very, very difficult part of your life, something that you don't like, something that you don't want to go back to. But it worked. When we were done, I wasn't dazed. I didn't have brain fog. My head was clearer than it had ever been. I didn't even know what to do with feeling that way because I don't often feel that way. I usually feel like I'm floating in, you know, the trauma body. And I have no idea, like, even though I was there for it, I still cannot fully explain to you how it happened. You know, it's just something you got to go through. And every trauma therapist who is trained in trauma therapy, they have to go through that process themselves before they put you through it. So it's not like they was just trying some shit on me. Like, they knew what happened. They knew what was going to happen. They knew what I was going to feel. And I would see her, and then I would have another therapy session afterwards with my other therapist where I would process everything that happened. Or I would think, oh my God, when we was talking about this, it made me think about this other thing that happened. And now I'm thinking about this other thing, and I'm thinking about this other thing. And you know what? It makes sense now because of this thing that happened. All of that's going to happen when you go through trauma therapy because it connects so much to other things in your life. You're going to have moments where it just like, yeah, we're talking about this thing, but let's talk about the 5 other things that are related to it. So it was definitely experience. Some people might get scared, you know, the first few times they do it and they're like, this is too much. I don't want to deal with this trauma. But you have to. You have to face your trauma head on so that you can actually heal from it. You cannot heal if you don't face it, period. If you pretend it doesn't happen, it don't work. If you try to convince yourself that you can just move forward, it don't work. I know some people who rekindled relationships with their abusers because they wanted to convince themselves that they were over the abuse. That's not how it works. You have to truly heal from that abuse. And also, you have no responsibility to ever be around your abuser anymore, even if they changed. You don't have to. But forcing yourself back into those toxic situations is not going to fix you. It's not going to help you just get over it. You don't just get over trauma. That's why it's called trauma. Because that needle, you can't reach it. You can't pull it out yourself. You need someone who is trained, who has spent years, maybe even decades, figuring out how to reach that needle and pull it out of your brain. You cannot do it yourself. You need to go and accept help. And if more people normalize mental health and normalize going to therapy, more people can heal from their trauma, and so they don't end up causing trauma onto others. Because even just talking about my personal experience, I went through a lot of trauma. The people who traumatized me, the people who caused me the most problems in my life, they also went through a lot of trauma. And so if they had healed from their traumas, it's very likely that I would have less trauma that I have to heal from. But they didn't do the work. So now I got to do the work. And I tell my sister, she has kids, I say, the best thing you can do as a mother is heal. The best thing you can do is improve your mental health, is to focus on your mental health, because you cannot be the best mother you can be if you have all of these traumas and these unhealed wounds on you. It's just not gonna happen. You may think you can power through it and do it for the kids. That's not how it works. You got to heal from your trauma, or you're going to inadvertently end up causing more trauma. And I think that a lot of people don't get that. I think a lot of people think, well, I don't think I'm doing anything related to my trauma. But you are, because it's still there. Really, Sadie? Stop it. You had to do all of that? Get away from me, acting up. But I'm sorry, y'all. I know this video was all over the place, but I was just so excited. I just could not believe, and I was planning to be dealing with this one trauma for at least like 3 months, but I could just not believe that it's actually possible to heal from a trauma. You know, even if you don't remember it, even if it happened a long time ago, you know, whether it happened to you or someone else, it's actually possible. And all my years of therapy have been leading up to this moment to where I finally I've gotten a handle on it. That was my whole goal last year, get a handle on your mental health. I got a handle on it. Now it's time to take that next step and to aggressively deal with the traumas so that they don't affect me anymore, so that I'm not triggered anymore, so that it's no longer a part of my life. Because I want to be able to have good relationships. I want to be able to talk about things that happened in the past without having a full-on, you know, can't breathe all of a sudden. I'm all upset now. I can't be in this room anymore. I have to leave. Because things that were traumatic to me, there are some people in my family who don't view them as traumatic experiences because it wasn't traumatic for them. So they'll bring it up and they'll talk about it. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here like, man, that was fucked up. And they're sitting like, what are you talking about? That was completely normal. Everything was fine. But it's not about, you know, what everybody else thinks. The trauma happened to you. The trauma lives in you. Whether or not it traumatized someone else is not important. What is important is that this is yours and you got to deal with it. And the best way to deal with that is to go to therapy, is to get a therapist who specializes in trauma, who can help you heal from your traumas. And a lot of us have traumas. Like I said, here's some statistics on adverse childhood experiences. 1 in 6 adults experienced 4 or more type of adverse childhood experiences. 5 of the top 10 leading causes of death are related to adverse childhood experiences. Preventing adverse childhood experiences could reduce the number of adults with depression as much as 44%. So this is something that is very, very common. This is something that is very, very widespread. And we just don't talk about it. We don't want to deal with it. You know, you have jobs where they don't care about your mental health. Like, yeah, you get vision and dental or whatever. The therapist, that's on you. You know, insurance companies that don't want to cover your therapy. You know, or if you're going through a mental issue that isn't related to like, oh, someone died, you know, your coworkers, they're not going to be sympathetic. Your boss is not going to be sympathetic. Your job is not going to be sympathetic. When mental health is just as serious as I sprained my ankle or I broke my leg or anything like that. If I need to get off work because I'm having a manic episode or I'm having a major depressive episode, that should not be a judgment of my character. That should be something that I need to work on and get help with. But so often mental illness becomes a judgment of someone's character. And I think that that's pretty fucked up. And I just really hope that one day in the future we can change that. Mental illness and mental health does not have to be just a white people thing. It can be something that we all work towards making better, because when your mental health is sound, you get to have secure attachments with people. You get to have good relationships with people. You treat other people with love and respect, and then they go and treat other people with love and respect. So many of us are walking around now sick. We are sick and we are messed up, and then we are hurting people because we're hurt and we don't know what to do with that hurt. So everybody who watches this, and there's not going to be many of you, but everybody who watches this, I really, really hope that you find a therapist. And your first therapist may not be good. You might have to go get another one, but find you a therapist. And if you think you need it, find you a therapist who specializes in trauma. Right now, you can use sites like BetterHelp and I forgot the other one. It's something Talk. But you can use sites where you can video chat therapists so they don't even have to be in the same city as you. I call my therapist on the phone sometimes. With trauma therapy, you specifically have to be in the room with your therapist. But when I'm not having a trauma therapy session, I'm on the phone with my therapist. So it's never been easier to get mental health, especially with COVID and all the pandemic stuff. They've been more and more likely, it's more and more likely that people are saying, man, this pandemic really messed me up. They're getting mental health care, whether it's through their job, whether they're going to the apps where they can text a therapist. You know, Medicare and like all these other different insurance companies are covering mental health now. It's never been easier. You just got to take that step and say, I want to do this. And you got to do it for you. You can't do it for nobody else. You know, if you have kids, yeah, you can do it for your kids, but it's got to be for you first, because that motivation has to come from within you. It can't come from outside of you, because you're going to give up and it'll be back to where you started. So that's all I want to say. I know it sounded like I was a bit all over the place. That's because trauma is a really, really difficult thing to discuss and diagnose. It's really hard talking about your own traumas. I don't really want to talk about traumas that might trigger other people's traumas. So it's a very difficult situation to talk about, but I just had to talk about it because I just cannot believe that I was able to heal from a trauma in the span of like a couple months. And it really makes me feel like I can do this. Like I can heal from this laundry list of traumas that I have. You know, maybe in the next couple years, I could be a completely different person. I could be uninhibited. You know what I mean? I could be so much greater than I am right now if I didn't have these traumas holding me back and preventing me from chasing my dreams or having meaningful relationships. And that's a lot. That's a lot. So thank you guys for sitting through this with me. Thank you guys for listening to me ramble about this. If you have any questions about specific things about trauma, if you have questions about what trauma therapy is like my experiences with it, or any questions about like how trauma affected me personally or more symptoms that I have, you can ask them down in the comment section. I love to like converse with you guys or even make another video about it. All right, you guys, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Love you. Bye.